This documentary is about the fun police. It's about trickery, fraud, about lies. We will uncover the lies and the deception that the fun police have fed you. Who are the fun police? You won't be disappointed.
People saying, oh, we don't want to tax the poor. We want the poor to live longer so that they can get an education and enjoy life.
These individuals are often those with the best of intentions. They want healthier and purer living without all the fun things you thought you enjoyed. But rather than just telling you how you should live, they're using the force of law to do it.
In recent decades, it's been tied into an anti-capitalist mentality. You will always hear people who are against tobacco, vaping, alcohol, food, and what have you. These are the people we need to regulate. They are the cause of the problem. These are the vectors of diseases. And generally speaking, this is just a rhetorical trick, really. It's a political maneuver.
But nobody asked them to do that. We certainly didn't ask them to change our laws or try to control our society. The fun police aren't much fun to be around, but somehow they're never alone. Who wants a fun police in their lives? Some politicians and activists, apparently, and a lot of lobbyists, but not us.
Michael will fail.
The post-work happy hour might be a modern-day invention, but working to drink is not. In ancient Egypt, workers who built the pyramids were paid in beer vouchers. So there's no shame in waiting to crack open a cold one after work. Rest easy. But there used to be some shame in that. The clean living movement began in the mid-19th century and denounced alcohol, tobacco, tea, and coffee for awakening our evil traits.
A variety of actors insisted that activities such as drinking, smoking, consumption of narcotics, and even masturbation, believe it or not, were harmful to yourself as a person, and you needed to be prevented from doing these things for your greater good.
It was thought that men would be debilitated by alcohol and tobacco, and women would be injured by coffee and tea. They also linked these substances to each other to amplify their bad reputation. If you drink coffee, you're more likely to be a smoker. If you're a smoker, you're probably a drunk. The early gateway effect argument. See the connection? But these tactics were despised, especially among the workers who wanted these substances to make it through their long days. What you see here is a random group of individuals using morality as a battering ram to demonize other people's choices. This is the first rule of the prohibitionist playbook: morality.
I think a lot of people do have a moralistic drive, and they do think that if they don't like doing something and there's some sort of risk involved to it, that nobody else should be doing it either. Some of them just started as anti-smoking groups, or focused mostly on smoking, then moved on to alcohol, and now moving on to food and even to gambling, which isn't really a public health issue at all, but it's been a classic target of moralists over the years, which I think is a bit of a red flag.
They depict personal habits as moral problems requiring large-scale institutional interventions. There's no epidemic of noisy parties, but of rampant alcoholism. Smoking is a crisis that we must eradicate completely. Vaping should be banned because it might harm children, a constant argument for every prohibitionist's favorite substance.
The kids, why couldn't we legalize medical marijuana? I gotta protect the kids. Why can't we have needle exchange programs? Gotta protect the kids. Why can't we reduce these harsh mandatory sentences? Gotta protect the kids. I mean, there's always holding up, as if the whole drug war being justified as one great big Child Protection Act. And that's exactly what's happening with the tobacco issue now.
Our best example was in the beginning of the American Progressive Era. The populist movement included diverse and often contradictory economic, social, and political forces. Devoted Protestants, political progressives, industrialists, philanthropists, and some women's rights figures. They deployed reams of propaganda blending together notions of family values and vague religious attributions to persuade those who never thought much about a drink or two. Suddenly, everyone who drank was an alcoholic, and we had to do something about it.
Prohibition is really more like a culture. It's a set of assumptions that influence the way institutions work.
These days, the fun police are more nuanced. The neo-prohibitionists are no longer trying to cater to our sociable sentiments such as being a good mother or devout Catholic, or to dissuade us away from drinking, smoking, or consuming caffeine or nicotine. In many ways, these substances are an important part of socializing in most of the world. They're hard to erase completely. But rather, what they do now is even more sinister. They invoke public health. What does public health mean? Is there such a thing as a healthy public?
There's actually a few different things going on, I think, now with the modern prohibitionist movement. Yes, you're right that they do portray themselves very much as being part of public health, a wing of the medical establishment, if you will. If you actually look at these people's backgrounds, they're usually not actually from the medical establishment. They're of all sorts, social sciences, or nothing at all. Or they're just career lobbyists, in some instances.
The first invocation of public health was mostly related to improving the working conditions in industrial towns in the early 1900s. The public health domain included legitimate health concerns, preventing disease, promoting sanitation and personal hygiene, and education efforts to improve them. But the progressive era, it defined public health in ethically charged terms. The development of social machinery which will ensure to every individual in the community a standard of living adequate for the maintenance of health. This attempt was considered elitist and controlling by the working class. But nowadays, it's much easier to scare people with public health concerns. We see it all with every public epidemic called by our public health agencies, whether it be the COVID-19 pandemic, alcoholism, video gaming, or whatever epidemic they've come up with. We wanted to believe that whatever the World Health Organization said was true, because they're the highest government authority and they have no reason to spread misinformation. But later on, we realized that the World Health Organization is not an angel-like organization that protects individuals, but rather one that caters to their friends, to their donors, and to their political allies, no matter how unsavory. One such donor, who's the perfect example of a neo-prohibitionist, is former New York mayor and billionaire Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg has tallied up an impressive $2 billion into vaping and tobacco control, and yet more global policy making, funded by the billionaire every year. Let's see how they control the narrative.
Teen vaping and flavored e-cigarettes just got a $160 million boost. Bloomberg Philanthropies revealed this morning that it's funding a new program aimed at ending the epidemic. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids will coordinate the push. This follows a new study that found flavor was the reason most young adults said they started using e-cigarettes.
Not done yet.
All the progress we've made in reducing teen smoking in particular is being turned around, because the kids like the flavor in the vaping products.
And more misinformation.
Public Health England, England's version of the CDC, they say that e-cigarettes are 95 to 98% safer than traditional cigarettes.
Yeah, well, so does Wilbur Ross. So come on, I mean, let's get serious
England
here.
is Wilbur Ross?
Okay.
Well, it's bad science.
And more.
If your kid was doing this and winds up with an IQ 10 or 15 points lower than he or she would have had for the rest of her life.
Is that demonstrated?
The science shows that it has a negative impact on brain development. It's hard to measure those kinds of things.
In 2016, for his efforts and his significant giving, Michael Bloomberg was named the World Health Organization's Global Ambassador for Non-Communicable Diseases and Injuries.
That's an example that kind of encapsulates the public choice failures here. The revolving door politics, that the same people involved in the private groups end up in the public groups and give out awards to the same private groups they were part of.
When you see a public health warning from the World Health Organization, especially regarding vaping or tobacco control, now you know where it comes from. Politics. It's kept us busy for decades. In the 21st century, we live and die by politics. It rules our lives, quite literally. Prohibitionists know that, and they use that. That brings us to the second rule of the playbook, politics. Prohibitionists now and then control the framing of lifestyle choices to introduce their solutions into the political process. They use radical language to make matters more dramatic. Think of escalating alcohol taxes to save lives and bans on nicotine products to protect our youth. Often, it's the most vulnerable who pay the price.
Most people who are well-educated, relatively affluent, are not much in contact with smokers. The smokers have been forgotten. They tend to come from marginalized groups, stressed out people. Native Americans are heavy smokers. LGBTQ folk are heavy smokers. People, especially with emotional and mental issues, use cigarettes to calm themselves down or lift themselves up. Those groups are pretty invisible.
And in those pursuits, the prohibitionists are using selective language to confuse you and cause panic.
One of the most interesting things about modern day policymaking is that people insist that they're not going towards a specific end state. But what they do instead is this sort of piecemeal engineering where they say, oh, but I don't want to take away whatever rights you keep complaining about, but I'm going to regulate a little bit of this, then a little bit of that, then a little bit of this, then a little bit of the other thing. And looking at it at a macro level, you see that we're actually in an age of prohibition that's actually more extensive than the one before.
On smoking, for instance, youth smoking is at a record low. The uptaking of vaping remains minimal and highly selective and is still illegal by all accounts. Another perpetuated myth is that vaping flavors are the main draw for why young people start vaping. Beyond that, the American Lung Association and other prohibitionist groups founded by Michael Bloomberg argue that young people are becoming smokers by starting out using flavored vapes as a gateway drug, so that all flavors, even for adults, should be illegal. But when we ask young people, we see that they have a completely different picture. According to a recent CDC study, the most common reason for young people trying e-cigarettes, especially among middle and high school students, was curiosity, cited by 55% of respondents. Only 22.3% said they tried e-cigarettes because they were, quote, available in flavors, about the same amount who said they used them for tricks. Ostensibly, vaping flavors like mint and fruit are all but illegal in the United States and in many other countries. But this obvious link between flavors and youth smoking remains unproven. What is proven, however, is the link between anxiety levels and risky behavior patterns in youth. Instead of tackling the real problem, the general dissatisfaction with the quality of life amongst young people, neo-prohibitionists seem to convince politicians to attack the symptoms and take away rights and liberties for adults. You see, the original gangster OG prohibitionists were a lot more direct. They were successful in a way that they got politics to work for them. But even during Prohibition, they were wildly unsuccessful in making people stop drinking.
Even in our study, where people who insisted on the morality of banning these different lifestyles actually ended up creating a very corrupt system that didn't end up removing anything, but it did end up making lives worse.
Speakeasies were the norm. Homebrewing and home distilling was all the rage. The Great Gatsby continued to have the best parties all around. And for those of us who promote choice, many neo-prohibitionists use weapons of both rhetoric and process to lock us out from the debate. They label their opponents as being in cahoots or as shills, capitalist, with industries such as big pharma, big tobacco, or big tech. It's a type of false consciousness fallacy.
Big Tobacco did not invent tobacco harm reduction. They didn't invent e-cigarettes. It was mostly, small business people, consumers kind of coming up with these ideas oftentimes.
All the while, Michael Bloomberg's charity is funneling millions into the health agencies of countries such as the Philippines and India, all in exchange for specific bans and consumer product restrictions. All of this has called into question the influence of the billionaire's reach. That's what led Indian Prime Minister Modi to cut off some of Bloomberg's purse strings in 2014 and has sparked recent investigations into Bloomberg's shady donations to the FDA of the Philippines. If you know your history well and enjoy some level of media literacy, social media is a fascinating place for you. If you know your history, You know well how prohibitionists used to campaign against alcohol, tobacco, or even coffee and tea. Or you know that even a literary giant like Leo Tolstoy could be used as a tool for these campaigns. He wrote the pamphlet, Why Do People Stupefy Themselves?, exactly for this purpose. When you see someone campaigning for banning something and you think, why would they do this? Don't. If Tolstoy falls for it, any celebrity could. But there's more. In 2023, nobody needs to write an essay or protest on the streets anymore. Public health moralizing used to resonate amongst a handful of people based on a leaflet. Now it reaches millions with a snap of a finger or a picture. Detox trends, wellness regimes, primal diets, and misinformation about alcohol or nicotine or smoking can achieve instant moral indignation from millions of followers via a targeted hashtag on Instagram, a well-crafted viral post on Twitter or TikTok. The times, they are a-changin', aren't they?
Free junk food and viral energy drinks on TikTok and Instagram under proposed laws to tighten food advertising on social media.
The blueprint remains the same, using media, politics, and influence. Back then, it was mostly advertising. Those early prohibitionists could only dream of the scope of misinformation that major media outlets would hold in 2023. Or even influencers, YouTubers, health gurus, and life coaches. The incentive system is quite perverse. These people become more famous by acting as if they've figured it all out. All of their morning routine videos, eating habits, social lives, their identity becomes the subject of their brand. What's worse is that they gain more traction by being more and more outrageous. So this is the deadly mix. They defend outrageous opinions and make it their personality. Then you get stuff like this.
We are bombarded with information about the great things that happen when we drink a poisonous drug from day one of being born in the world.
People who are considered experts defend outright bans on alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine behind moralization and the illusion of technocracy, just because they've reached an outrageous and pseudoscientific conclusion, and everyone else should do the same. They are the experts, and everyone else, us plebs, we need to be educated. Bloomberg has the same approach.
For me, is that some of the leading opponents of tobacco and nicotine harm reduction have been my allies, Democratic politicians who are allies on legalizing marijuana for medical purposes and more broadly on needle exchange, on harm reduction, on sentencing reform, you name it, but who remarkably have been leading the way. I mean, the really big bad guy in all of this has been Michael Bloomberg. You know, my mayor in New York City for 12 years, and although I disagreed strongly with many of his specific policies, I also thought he was a very effective mayor thinking about the long-term interests of the city. You know, his philanthropies have supported a lot of good work around the world, including trying to reduce smoking, but he got captured by the fanatic anti-harm reduction forces and has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to oppose harm reduction and even to try to demonize and target people really highly respected ethical advocates of tobacco harm reduction.
The billionaire Bloomberg is spending his hard-earned dollars to ban super-sized sugary drinks in New York City, Cook County, Illinois, and Chicago, and Philadelphia. He thinks poor people can't make good decisions for themselves. Sound familiar? People who can't keep up their health, they become a burden to society. Those evil traits. Public health advocacy for the sake of regulating social life. Rent-seeking? Does all of that sound familiar? We thought so. The Fun Police are not a new group. They have been around for, well, forever. They are the neo-prohibitionists of our times. They are the teetotalers, the rent-seekers, and frankly, the killjoys. They know how to use morality, politics, and media against us, consumers who prefer to choose. Luckily for us, they still use the same century-old playbook. We can see through it, and we'll defend our rights to have fun however we want. And we belong to the counterculture, and it is consumer choice.